We're here to say goodbye to our brothers and sisters, to our fathers and mothers, to our friends.
Why Jon Snow's resurrection was more important than you think. The story of Jon Snow is one of the most compelling in the history of Westeros. Born as a supposed bastard, raised in the cold halls of Winterfell, and bound by honor and duty, Jon's journey has been one of courage, loyalty, and sacrifice.
That can never be
perhaps
repaid.
the most pivotal moment in his saga,
It is our
a moment that reshaped not just his destiny but the fate of the Seven Kingdoms, is often misunderstood.
honor
That moment is his
to
resurrection.
keep them alive in
Jon
memory.
Snow's death at the hands of his own brothers in the Night's Watch was shocking, brutal, and heartbreaking. In the icy darkness of Castle Black, Jon's life was ended by
Everyone
men he had
in this
sworn to lead,
world
men who feared his
owes
idealism,
them a debt
his
that
sense
can
of
never
justice, and the moral code he upheld. His body lay lifeless, a symbol of betrayal and the fragility of honor in a world dominated by power and politics. For fans, it was an emotional gut punch. But for the story of Westeros, it was a turning point, one with profound consequences. Jon Snow's resurrection by Melisandre, the Red Priestess, is more than just a fantastical moment of magic. It is a narrative pivot, a moment that signals the arrival of destiny, prophecy, and the alignment of forces necessary to face the true threat to Westeros, the Night King and his army of the dead. Melisandre herself understood the gravity of the act. Her words were deliberate. Jon Snow had a role to play that extended far beyond the North, beyond the Night's Watch, and beyond personal vendettas. He was the key to confronting the existential threat that no army, no alliance, and no king could face alone. The resurrection also served a symbolic purpose. Jon's death and return cemented him as a figure beyond mortality, a man shaped not just by blood and birthright, but by destiny. In a land where lineage, power, and titles often dictate fate, Jon's revival signaled that some forces, honor, courage, and the will to protect the realm, transcend even death itself. His rebirth positioned him as a leader whose authority could not merely be questioned by politics, but was validated by fate, prophecy, and a higher purpose. Critically, Jon Snow's resurrection had profound political implications. Before his death, Jon was already a respected leader, but his authority was limited to the North and the Night's Watch. Many Southern lords were skeptical of the North's priorities, while the threat of the White Walkers was largely dismissed in King's Landing. Jon's return changed everything. The miraculous nature of his survival demanded attention. It forced skeptical lords and hesitant allies to reconsider their positions. Suddenly, Jon was not just a regional leader, he became the linchpin in a coalition capable of confronting the greatest threat Westeros had ever faced. Beyond politics, Jon's resurrection profoundly influenced the dynamics of other key characters. Daenerys Targaryen, whose forces and dragons represented the mightiest armies in Westeros, encountered Jon not as a northern lord, but as a man marked by destiny. His resurrection elevated his status in her eyes, creating a bond of respect, loyalty, and eventually love. The resurrection also underscored the limits of her own power. Dragons and armies could not defeat death itself, a stark reminder that there were forces in the world beyond even the most formidable weapons and forces. Moreover, Jon's resurrection reaffirmed a central theme of Game of Thrones, the interplay between duty and destiny. Throughout his life, Jon repeatedly chose honor over ambition, service over power, and morality over vengeance. His death was a tragic consequence of these choices. But his revival allowed him to reconcile duty with destiny. He could continue to lead, protect, and fight for the living in ways that would have been impossible had he remained dead. Resurrection gave him the opportunity to complete his role in the greater story, to confront the Night King, to unite factions of Westeros, and ultimately to shape the political future of the realm. From a narrative perspective, Jon Snow's resurrection also served as a catalyst for critical story developments. The alliances that formed after his return were different because of his survival. The Northern Lords, initially skeptical of Southern politics, were inspired by his return. The Free Folk, who had initially mistrusted the Night's Watch, rallied behind him. His presence became a symbol of unity, reminding disparate factions of the urgency to confront the undead. Without Jon's resurrection, the coalition against the Night King might never have formed, and the events of the Great War could have unfolded very differently, perhaps even with catastrophic consequences. Jon's revival also allowed him to confront the moral complexity of power. Once returned, he was faced with decisions that would affect the survival of the living, the loyalty of allies, and the legitimacy of the Iron Throne. These were not decisions a dead man could make. His resurrection gave him agency at a pivotal moment, ensuring that the Seven Kingdoms could respond to threats in a strategic and morally guided way. The consequences of his death would have been permanent. The consequences of his return were transformative. Finally, Jon Snow's resurrection emphasized one of the most profound truths of the Game of Thrones saga. Leadership is not just about power, birthright, or fear. It is about resilience, sacrifice, and the courage to face impossible odds. Jon's return from death demonstrated to all of Westeros that true leadership transcends even the ultimate finality of life. His survival was not merely miraculous, it was a narrative device that reinforced the ideals he had lived by: loyalty, honor, and an unyielding commitment to protect the realm, even at great personal cost. In the end, Jon Snow's resurrection was more important than it might first appear. It was not simply a dramatic plot twist or a magical spectacle. It was the moment that allowed the story of Westeros to continue, that enabled alliances to solidify, and that positioned a man of integrity to confront threats beyond mortal comprehension. Without it, the North might have fallen, the Night King might have succeeded, and the Seven Kingdoms could have been plunged into darkness with no hope of redemption. Jon's resurrection was a turning point, a reminder that in a world ruled by betrayal, war, and ambition, some forces remain beyond human control. Destiny, prophecy, and courage often dictate outcomes more than armies or politics. Jon Snow's return from death reinforced the central message of his character, that true heroism is defined not by the titles one holds, but by the sacrifices one is willing to make for the greater good. In the end, Jon Snow's resurrection changed the fate of Westeros not because it was magical, but because it empowered a man to fulfill his purpose, unite allies, and confront a threat that would have otherwise destroyed the world of the living. It demonstrated that the Seven Kingdoms are shaped not just by kings and queens, but by those who rise, even from death, to fight for what is right. Jon Snow's resurrection was not merely a plot device, it was the fulcrum upon which the fate of Westeros turned, a testament to the enduring power of honor, duty, and destiny in a land defined by fire, blood, and ice.